because I think it's a wonderful anthology, and I'm very happy that we were able to then, well, I think we distributed 100 copies this morning, and that's all thanks to PEN International. They have a series they call Free the Word, and this ConVerse anthology is actually exactly what PEN International is all about, which is about the promotion of literature, but also the promotion of understanding and the idea that literature honors no borders and has no borders. And then it's also very much about the art of translation and the effect that has in terms of human understanding across the globe. So this is a perfect example. They told us you can get a little bit of money, and they thought, well, we need to find something that really fits into what Free the Word is all about. And then we remembered, well, ConVerse happened at the Pieterse, and that's exactly what it's all about. So yeah, shall we do, let's go with Kabosa's idea. It's probably nicer if you all introduce yourselves. After we listen to the Bakfiba Underground, I'm also a little bit reluctant to take out my smartphone and read biographies from that. So Siphokazi, will we start with you on that end?
Okay, my name is Siphokazi Jonas, and I'm a poet, one of the poets in the anthology. It's sufficient.
But there was some really impressive stuff in the biography that Pieter said.
I'm a writer and a performer.
And you performed in Los Angeles?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's probably better as a Q&A. But yeah, I write poems, I write for theatre, I'm a spoken word. I would be known as a spoken word artist, I guess, but it doesn't cover everything that we do.
Yeah.
I think that's all I can think that's relevant for this conversation.
That's fine. That's more than enough. Pieter, over to you.
Hallo, ek is Pieter Odendaal. Ek is een van die editors van ConVerse, saam met Annel, Pieterse en Jolyn en Jonas, wat ongelukkig nie vandag hier saam met ons kan wees nie. Ja, ek weet nie. Ek skryf. Ek is baie geïnteresseerd in vertaling. Ek like performance van enige soort. En wat nog? Ja, né? Okay. Ja, inzink. Ek het inzink poetry begin saam met Adrian van Wyk, so 7 jaar gelede op Stellenbosch. So ons we specifically focus on promoting spoken word poetry, or just poetry, I guess, in general, in all its form. We can talk later about all the problematic terms that people use to label the things we do. At the end of the day, it's just poetry, really. But yeah, so that's me.
Pieter, you should do a little bit of self-promotion there. You've got a debut volume of poetry out.
Yeah!
The title?
Asof geen berge ooit hier gewoon het nie. En ons gaan eindelijk, ek dink, is het 4 uur? 4 uur gaan ek en Desmond Painter oor die bundel gesels, so if you're interested, come on.
And available at the bookstore?
Yes.
Yeah. Jolyn.
Hello everyone. My naam is Phillips and work in die bundel. It's terrible because where I come from, people are like, she's just bragging badly, really bad. You want to brag badly. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm included in ConVerse as well. It's a poem that was from my debut collection, Radbraak, wat laatst jaar uitgekomen het. En ik schrijf ook woordstories. My other book was woordstories, Ching Chang Cherries, and cookies.
And you see, that's why you have a guy like me to help poets promote themselves. Radbraak also makes you a prize-winning poet, a bekroonde dichter. And Ching Chang Cherries was also a stage production, stage at the Woordfees. Yeah. And you also sing, and you'll be singing tonight with the Vasterplay, right? Excellent. Annel, Pieterse.
Okay, hallo, ek is Annel Pieterse. Ek was ook een van die redakteurs saam met Pieter in Bongeni. En ek het my doktorale navorsing gedoen oor die oor performance of spoken word poetry in Suid-Afrika. So ek stel baie daarin belang as 'n navorsingsveld. Dis wat ek doen.
Baie dankie, Annel. I think a great way to kick this off is to start with your poem, Siphokazi, which is also opens the anthology and really goes to the heart of the matter of some of the things that we want to discuss today. So there are still a few copies left. Katrina, is er nog? Of is allemaal nou weg? There are 5 copies left. If anybody wants them, they're completely free. So then we can also say turn to page. What is it? Page 8. Page 8. Bladsy 8.
Okay, making bread. When all is mixed to dough, I hold a pinch of every Issakosa poem I write up to my mother's mouth to knead between her teeth. We deliberate on dry ingredients, that idiom there, this translation here, these puns here and those ones there. But she is mum on my substitutions of self-rising flour for yeast, knows it is the best I can do in the circumstance of a tongue baked in surrogacy. Every December, in exchange for a Tupperware dish full of roasted cook tried over coals, I present Umama with English poems to match the decadence of the season. English, with its heavy hand of sugar, corrodes my vernacular. English poems do not let me forget that this bowl I work in is borrowed. When we break bread at the kitchen table, we slather slices of my mother's tongue with margarine, steer it along a steaming tide of rooibos tea or glass sweating with ice and auras. I do not know how to make this meal last all year long. I want to pray in isiXhosa. Give us this day our daily bread, and when we commune with you, never let us need grace again.
Thank you very much. So in the introduction to the anthology, Pieter, you say that the idea was to do something multilingual in the 3 languages spoken in the Western Cape, but that it became clear very soon that this was actually then going to be a conversation, and I think one which your poem opens in a way. So can you please tell us how the process worked and yeah.
Well, actually some years ago in 2013, Annel and myself edited a volume. That was our first kind of attempt to work with poetry and translating it, called Many Tongues. And that was our first engagement with working with poetry translation and the kind of complications that arise from it, and the complexities, and that really inspired us, to do this project. That the focus of Many Tongues was on the translators, really. So we identified translators specifically, and then they chose a poem from their mother tongue that they wanted to submit to the collection, and then that poem was translated. This time around, we decided we wanted to focus on young-ish South African poets, especially also given my kind of experience working with InZync, organizing poetry events. We wanted to bring so-called spoken word artists, into the translation space and into the space of the book. So that was kind of our logic, and then we approached poets that we've worked with in the past, that we have relationships with, and that we think that we thought might make a valuable contribution to the collection.
And so how did it work then after the submission process? How did Annel, maybe that's a question you'd like to take, because I feel you had a lot to do with the process, or
translation. Yeah, so the poems would come in, and then depending on what language it was in, I think I started with the English poems. No, the Afrikaans. Pieter and I divided the English and Afrikaans poems between us. So dit ons daai vertaal, and Bongeni took the Xhosa poems and then translated them into English. And then when those English translations were done, Pieter and I received them, and then we decided which of those, who would translate which one into Afrikaans from there. So it was like a cycle of translation, basically. But the process itself was actually very interactive. We often sat down, sometimes we actually had to meet each other and sit down together face to face so that we could hash out some of the difficulties that people were encountering, or that the 3 translators were encountering I think Siphokazi also came in at some point to help with that. Sort of how certain idioms or certain cultural references, the difficulties of translating those. And we spent a lot of time on Google Docs as well. That would actually make it a very interesting study in itself. But working and asking questions and trying to figure out what the best way is to render the translation.
If I understand correctly, your poem was originally written in English, right? And so how did you feel about the translation? Because one of the things you touch on as well is that during the process you realized that some things have to get lost in translation. Were you happy in the end with the results, or?
Yes, I think because the way I view translation is it's a collaborative process. That translated poems are themselves almost written poems. So it's not looking for a direct. It's almost interpretive rather than transcripted. So it's looking at what the ways in which language is understood in use, and the different histories that maybe phrases, idioms have. And obviously with this poem, when we perform it, especially in English and isiXhosa, it takes on a very specific irony of saying, I want to pray in isiXhosa, and having someone say, ndifuna ukuthandaza ngesiXhosa. Right, so there's an irony to it in actually then translating it into isiXhosa when it's actually about the difficulties of writing and expressing myself in that specific language, which is a beautiful irony to have on stage, and to really think about what expression is in certain languages. So to lament, to have the very thing that I'm lamenting, having someone else take on that project for me was actually very, very important, and I think it was done better by someone else translating it than me trying to translate that project. So I wasn't looking to be happy in saying, okay, this is what I said, but more this is what I meant.
Yeah.
And so I think even when I came in later, there were other poems where we struggled. I remember one of the words we really couldn't find translation for was schizophrenia in isiXhosa, because there are so many connotations around mental health, and it carried its own history that we even did research. We're trying to get the Rural Health Network to help us, but there's no word for it yet. And yet there are ways in which mental health is understood within communities that have a certain history. So we had to be sensitive to say, how are we going to express the same idea without re-inscribing certain oppression or certain problematic views towards mental health. So there was a work happening other than one language into another, saying how can we intervene in how these words themselves are actually carried in expression, in communication.
Yeah, I thought there was a wonderful complexity this morning in having the two languages next to one another, and the English original version is actually about this surrogacy of English and the role it plays, and yeah, I think that worked the charm. I think we could maybe, Jolyn and Pieter, we could go just to make it more specific for people who haven't read the anthology yet, to talk about specific poems and the kind of, struggles or challenges you had in translating it. We already, Jolyn, this morning at the Afbop poetry book is now, I think it's one of the first anthologies in all 11 languages, and we talked about the challenges of translation, but maybe you'd like to, read your poem again and then maybe talk about how you feel about the translation?
Ballade van Wasdag. Ten minste ryk ons skoon, ek en jy, rondom jou pa wat walms maak van mooi vallei, jonkier en hom. Ek en my ma's wasgoed wat sy dophou deur die kombuisvenster, wasgoed wat sing huil. Ma sê altyd, dit is nie sy tyd nie, dit is nie sy tyd nie, sy het nie meer tyd nie. So staan sy bukkend oor die wasgoed en spoel draai, met skuim en seperig sonder ophou, was sy boeta se ongeluksklere. Ek en ma word wasgoed wat sy dophou deur die kombuisvenster, wasgoed wat sy blind uil. So was hy. Ons eet pap Sondag, gebakte brood, bitterboere toeroos. Reeks daaroor dat jou pa altyd vleis maak van die bottel en vis van ons. So was jy my. Niks is mooi, my seun is weg, my hoop is skaars. Ek hanker altyd na niks. Ek wil verstaan wat ma so blind neer die vank. Gee dit 'n naam. Ek sal dit dra sodat ma my kan bemin. Ek wil ontsla die naarsigtigheid wat ek gaar. Ging tog maar woordelose begin. My seun se klipportret moet rus in sy sandklippe plek. Ek wil verstaan, gee my tog sy hoë geheime. Hy die naam van rede in my hart. Ek die sukkelende self, die nie klipportret. Gee my die verdoeselde geheim in sy oë. Ten minste ryk ons skoon, ek en jy rondom pa wat walms maak van mooi valle jonkeer en hom. Maar sê altyd, dit is nie sy tyd nie, dit is nie sy tyd nie, daar was nie tyd nie. So was ons.
So this poem strikes me as quite untranslatable. And also in one of the lovely reviews of your first book of poetry, Pieter said that you can actually hear the little twigs and branches break of the language as you make it your own, as you really take Afrikaans and change it into something else and morph it into an own language. So what did you do in this case, and how did you get to a place where you thought, okay, well, this is okay,
When I was invited to participate in the project, I remember Pieter wrote me an email and said I could submit poetry. And so I had sent stuff that I thought would be translatable, and then Annel came and I'm just like, no, not this one. I hate this one so much. Because I had struggled, because I'm constantly someone who works in two languages all the time. And even for myself it was difficult, because the irony was that I'd broken so much of the Afrikaans, or maimed it in so many ways to find my own meaning, that I couldn't bring myself to do that when I had to translate it. And so I like that Annel actually then did what I wasn't able to do, that I was afraid of doing, because I was held on so much on because was in Afrikaans is also like the past tense of it's like, so this was goed was. Ooh, was. Hey, we just spoke about this thing about Afrikaans and like how English is so rude to us, and it isn't. It's mean. And autocorrect. I want to talk about autocorrect also, maybe later. So I was like, because I felt like, how amazing is my language that it can do two things, that it's like, I explained this morning, it's like Jonas, the Greek god who looks to the past and to the future at the same time. And I think that that's really amazing that my language is able to do that. And in English, I had to break that word, and I didn't want to do it. And yet that is why I did it in my Afrikaans. That's why I did it to Afrikaans. That's why I made the language, to break it apart, to come to a new meaning. And yet I didn't want to let go of that ambiguity that this word that I discovered can do.
But rakbraking is not so easily done.
No.
I mean, you've made rakbraking into a fine art, and I think, how would you translate the word then? I mean,
exactly. I was actually thinking, if this book had to be translated into English, what would radbraak become? Because the English for radbraak is the Catherine's wheel, is what it's known. But radbraak had become a weird thing where the word rat, Dutch means wheel, and breek, obviously that's where it comes from, on the wheel, which is lovely and specific. Whereas the English is sort of euphemistic, because Catherine's wheel sounds like a really nice looking wheel. Like a and that's the danger really, that when I was writing this poetry collection, I was just like, I'm using this word, and people have been saying that ek radbraak in Afrikaans, of ek raakpraak in Engels because my accent isn't proper or I'm just not doing it right now. Also did a language French, and my French teachers don't do it. So I mean, like all those things. So I was also thinking about if I had to translate this whole book, what would the title be? Because and even putting a picture on the cover, because my uitgewer was like, ons kan nie 'n stuk dood op die voorblad sit nie, niemand gaan dit koop nie. So like also like how do you put Radbraak as a picture on the book as well, and then also having to, yeah, the whole process was just an interesting unraveling of like the thingy, the shell, inspiring.
Yeah.
Yes,
I can understand why you were quite exhausted at the end of.
Yeah, I was done.
At the end of this process. Yeah.
Done.
But Braak, of course, also has to vomit in there,
Yeah.
so that's so it's very difficult. But Annel, in terms of your involvement, some of the translators said this morning that they're actually not that keen on having so big a conversation with some of the poets because it becomes impossible in the end. So they had, there's a little process where certain things you can reject out of hand, other things can be talked about, and then there's, grammar and punctuation or whatever. So didn't you at some times feel like Jolyn felt about Radbraak that this is actually quite impossible?
For the most part, no. I enjoyed it, but the one I struggled with most was Boejongse Kind van Rymstein. Dit was baie moeilik om te doen. En ek het vanoggend gesit en dink hoekom, en die rede is dat iets waarmee ek in Afrikaans sukkel is om te onthou dat die werkwoord aan die einde van die sin moet kom. So dis die eerste ding, en daai gedig maak staat daarop vir sy ontwikkeling, vir sy spoed en ritme, en om die metafoor of die tema so uit te lig op aksie. So dit gaan oor aksie. So alles eindig met hierdie rymende line ends. En dit is allemaal, of meeste van dit is werkwoorde. So ek het nogal daarmee gesukkel in die Engelse vertaling om dit effectief reg te kry. Van die stanzas het beter gewerk as ander. En ek moes nogal baie, I had to rely a lot on internal rhyme to sort of substitute for the fact that I was struggling to get the right kind of line ending rhymes. So dit was bietjie moeilik geweest, maar ek dink dit het goed uitgedraai op die einde en Rymstein was tevrede daarmee geweest. So wat ek gedoen het was ek het maar net gesit en ek het hom vertaal en dan het ons dit gestuur vir die digters en meeste van hulle was baie tevrede daarmee geweest. Ek dink daar was min veranderinge geweest of min klagtes op die einde, ja. En iets wat interessant was spesifiek oor Jolyn sin is toe Mbongeni dit in Xhosa vertaal. Toe wil hy weet van die accident clothes, Pieterse ongeluksklere, en toe het ons nou so 'n bietjie daarmee gesit en toe sê hy in Xhosa kultuur is daar 'n ritueel wat 'n mens doen as iemand doodgeval het, dat jy hulle klere moet was en dan moet so dis half die laaste ding wat hulle gehad het, dis deel van daai ritueel van dit oorgee aan die doodes. So dit was 'n interessante aspek van die vertaling daar wat iets anders ingebring het in die Xhosa vertaling wat nie in die Afrikaans of Engels is nie, maar wat spesifiek is tot Xhosa funeral rituals. So dit is vir my interessant.
And I thought after sort of reading the book and your introduction that it seemed that a part of the point of the conversation was not only trying to understand other literatures and languages and the languages of this province, but also talking about what is actually untranslatable. And that also is very, very meaningful for part of the conversation. But Pieter, I was hoping maybe you would also do your poem, because I think it's a lovely poem. This morning you did it where the sea is almost rising up. You were two voices, and it was sort of, there was something really nice about that performance, but it's a lovely poem, and I'd also like to ask you about that translation. And then I thought we should also, because Kuleka Putuma couldn't be here today, but I think one of her poem is very strong, and you also talk about the fact that when that was translated into Afrikaans, you had a new connection to Simbamba, so I thought maybe we could do those two. I don't know who wants to read Kuleka's poem. Anybody wants to? Nobody?
Sal jy?
Okay, sal nou? Okay, fantasties.
Gaan ons eers Pieterse doen.
Kom ons doen eers Pieterse en dan hoor ons wat hom gepla het of gekwal het met die vertaal.
Wat het my gekwel? Bladsy?
59.
Oeh, die slodder. Wat het ons toe gesê?
Die ouene iets anders.
Ja, it's okay, wat ek die gedig lees en die aand toe die see gesing het. And the water, restless, wishes it could spew all of the slaves and ships onto shore, Kuleka Patuma. Ek lê half wakker, half dronk teen 'n duin op Bloubergstrand. Die stad dryf nes fosfor op die see. Die berg is uit die nag geklip. Borrels kondig hulle terugkom soos 'n crescendo aan. Koppe verskyn, boeie bo die golwe tussen my en die eiland. 'n Skare reis uit die see, 'n akwatiese koor wat asem skep. Senzenina, gorrel hulle uit hul strotte uit. Die maan wit en half soos die waarheid oor hoe die wêreld nog altyd was. Ons verower mekaar nes monsterkewers, die grond krioel van ons, die aarde sweet geweld. Hulle kom aangeskuifel oor die skulpe in die nag wat nie kleur ken nie. Generasie stilgemaak is al die pad terug tot by Otjomao. Hul velle is geskilde perskes, hare vol seegras en sand, wange en buike hol vol krappe en anemone. Hulle kom terug om die verlede wakker te skrik. Hul strome slodder skoffel stories in die water. Die see sidder van betekenis.
Black Women, White Babies by Kuleka Patuma. I remember us age 6 or 7, or some age we could only think for ourselves through observation. We had already begun practicing how to wrap our Jessicas and Sophies with beach towels tight on our backs, rocking them back and forth until they fell asleep. When they woke up, we placed them on their bums between our thighs, neatly plaiting their hair, practicing how to feed them, how to carry them, careful not to drop them, careful not to upset them, practicing how to please them. It was important that they in our imagination were pleased. It didn't matter why then. If they broke, we could fix them too. Twisted their limbs back into their torso, rolled their eyes back to normal. No one wanted a demonic-looking Jessica or a Sophie with a missing eye. They were not disposable. We grew old with them. You had to grow old with them, an unspoken rule. This is how we learned loyalty. We wrapped t-shirts around our heads to imitate the movement of their hair. We changed their diapers, renamed them from time to time. Today, Jessica. Tomorrow, Nosipho. The next day, Chomi. And the next day, Madam. We could never call our Jessicas Madam with a straight face. We could not tell you why we found it funny either. It just was, just like serving them tea. We could only continue with other kinds of playing once we had put them to sleep. Our server had no name. There were no dogs to walk, or cutlery to arrange, or baby Tom's piss to wipe, or floors to mop or bedding to change, or drones to vomit while the world went to war with our bodies. We didn't have to bend in and out of different postures, roles. The first black child in bath, black child in school uniform, porridge on table, black child to school, your hand waving goodbye to a black child that will call you mama once in the morning and again in the evening. The second, a train and 2 buses to a suburb that sneers at you as you clock in. Apron on, kettle on, change diaper, feed baby, feed madam. Jessica in towel, Jessica on back, Tom tugging on your pegs to remind you that he's still training. The piss on the floor will bring you to your knees, the way prayer does. The dogs will need walking, the cutlery will need arranging, Bars's underwear will need folding. If there is a protest that is in the interest of white privilege, you will need to march with them too. Carry their sunscreen and Jessica while they, Madam and Bars, march for equality. Yours. The third, you take 2 buses and a train back to your own. They have washed and hung their shirts, ironed the uniform for the morning, bathed and fed themselves. Their faces proudly peer from under the blanket and say, "Look, Mama, we are big now. We can do it all by ourselves." You cannot name the thing you feel. You can only feel it on your back.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so that is a poem where, interestingly enough, there was, I think, a real kind of a find when you translated it into Afrikaans, right?
Ja, Pieter het die vertaling gedoen na Afrikaans toe, maar en toe ons toe Mongeni gesit met die Xhosa vertaling en toe dit terugkom toe sien ons daar rocking them to and fro. Het hy vertaal as
Hy het dit vertaal as Sibambazela.
Sibambazela.
En toe het dit my laat besluit om dan nou die Afrikaans eerder te verander na Gesimbambatu. Ja, so dis maar net 'n voorbeeld van hoe die vertaalproses tot nuwe insigte gelei het, jy weet, na die Xhosa toe om dan die Afrikaans te verander. So dit was nogal so 'n interessante find geweest.
Yeah, I thought that was lovely. One of the things that we need to talk about, which you said beforehand is very lame and boring, is this whole thing with the spoken word thing. And you already referred to the so-called spoken poetry, but I think a little bit of your mission for you and Adrian Diff and the whole thing with InZync was also actually to abolish that really artificial distinction between the poetry for the page and then the performance poetry. Maybe you'd like to say something about that, because I'm sure that played a role as well as in compiling or inviting poets for this anthology.
Yeah, Siphokazi and I were talking about, you know, this question this morning as we were waiting for the shuttle, and that really interesting things are happening in the South African poetry landscape at the moment, where young poets are seemingly effortlessly moving between these different modalities, between, you know, publishing a book and having a touring show, and, you know, just really, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about the poetic word, right? And whatever the medium you choose to share that with, at the end of the day, it's the same. It's got the same root, you know. But it is a problematic. These terminologies are problematic. You know, like performance poetry, for instance, there's and it's also one thing to speak about it in this kind of context, and then another thing to try and, I guess, write academically about it, because I'm also busy with a PhD on poetry that is performed. And the thing is, I had a conversation with another poet and researcher called Raphael Dabdon, and he has also written interestingly on the spoken word scene, and especially on the history of these terms, and kind of how it's not an innocent history, how this history is very much colored by race and colored by kind of separate trajectories of black and white poetry in the country, you know, so that white poetry will be poetry and then black poetry will be performance poetry. And that also speaks to a long history of a kind of dichotomy between the oral traditions, indigenous oral poetic traditions that we have in this country, and then, you know, a tradition of writing poetry, or writing it down and then having it in a book, and then you become a poet, you know. So anyway, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that the terminologies are problematic. That I don't like any of the terms, you know, very particularly. Performance poetry, spoken word, I think in a way comes maybe to some kind of more neutral, descriptive ground. Ja, kletsrym, I mean, that's like, ja, dis nie die proper rym, jy weet, dis sommer so, jy weet, tussenin, tipe van storie. En podium poesie, klink ook dan verskrik, ja, anyway. The other thing with spoken word is applying spoken word in a South African context it is actually a term that is kind of came to us from the States and from the UK, and the kind of slam poetry scenes that emerged there, and then this new kind of hybrid art form, you know, and spoken word in a way, if you employ it in South African context, then it doesn't I think capture finely enough all these roots that poetry that is performed has in our context.
First round of the Cape Town Poetry Slam, which took place earlier last month. Where are we now? August. We were judging the Stellenbosch round, and there was a well-established Afrikaans poet who participated in the slam. But he's a published poet, so he's what one would sort of traditionally think of as a paper poet. And it was interesting to see how within the context of the slam, his poetry is obviously extremely good, but the ability to translate that poem into something that is performed is clearly very difficult, or was very difficult for him. And I was sort of wondering about it afterwards. How could one perhaps engage? Well, for one thing, not to read it off the paper, but to speak it to the audience would be one way of activating the latent performance potential within a poem, I think. So yeah, that was interesting to me, sort of as this encounter with how it's not about it's not about the poetry itself. It's about the person who's standing up and reading it, or the person who's standing up and saying it. Like how the poetry is being performed, and how the audience is being engaged in that embodied moment of speaking the poem.
If you like.
Okay, I think a lot has been said that's really relevant. I think maybe the question also hinges a little bit on how we view language, besides the politics of what it means to have something that's tangible, that has some sense of longevity, and performance might be seen as, you know, temporary and kind of a passing mode of expression. I think also there's something to be said for language, because for me, the word itself, the poem itself, performs on the page. That's why we have form. That's why we think, you know, should this line end here or there, or what about this rhyme? What I was saying earlier about how to translate the end rhymes from Afrikaans. So there's already performance happening, and so stage itself offers other other tools, right? Voice, body, gesture, space. I think that the boundaries are superficial. When they're set up, there's often, you know, we have to think about the reasons of why we create, because it's not just set up as poetry and or page. There's almost a hierarchy to it, that if you publish, now we can take you seriously, now you can come to this festival, but you can't really come to that one if you don't have a book, because I guess you don't need anything to sell, but you sell from your soul. Okay. Don't do that. So yes, so I think the stage forces us to rethink what the language is doing on the page, or not on the page, but also all the possibilities. When we think about pronunciation, we think about emphasis. So every time that Jolyn reads her poem, the way in which she does already gives us clue to the meaning of which verse is verse, right, in a different way than actually reading it. And I think that both we have so much to learn from each other, because they are extensions of each other. So when, you know, there's a way in which you can read a poem and describe certain meanings to it in performance, even if you're not, maybe if you don't have a theatrical background, some kind of performance background. But there is any distinction that we make between page and stage, we need to think very carefully about how that is happening. And whether we are creating some kind of power dynamic, some kind of hierarchy between the two. But what we've seen now is that spoken word is disrupting those boundaries. So this project allows for the words to move beyond where the poets can go. I think it's important for it being studied in the future and so on. But those who go into those spaces will understand. In fact, not just spoken word now, it's been happening forever. Even if you think about Imbongi, if you think about praise poetry, which itself has always been difficult to articulate. It's like, is it praise singing because it draws from music? Is it what is it? So I think what's happening in performance is putting both the page and the stage in the same arena, and kind of letting them battle it out and kind of figure out what the conversation is constantly in performance, but also to remind us maybe to move a little bit away from that modernist view of the reader as this, in solitude,
Consumer.
that just between you and the author.
Yeah.
But it brings the audience into collaborators in the process, because you see performers, if you get this response from the audience, then you feel the sea rising, right?
Yeah.
So even the audience become almost co-writers of this moment of performance. So that's why we've sort of thrown that question out now, because there are other interesting things we can ask about that relationship between performance and writing, because we also write when we're on stage, which is why now people can look at DVDs and albums as publishing. I think, though, what's happening is we're also problematizing that distinction, because sometimes the view is that young black poets, what you can do is the performance. That's your form of expression. But what we're saying here is that we can write. We can write well, and we'll challenge you on the page as well. So a range of expression isn't just in performance. So to think also of the black body as being able to produce in this form at will.
Yeah, I think that to me is very much a very important part of this conversation, because Koleka Putuma is now really known as a performance poet. She won the slam competition, was it 2 years ago, or am I? Long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting old. Anyway, but I think nobody would read this poem on paper and then say, well, this is only for the performance arena, because it deeply moves you on paper as well.
Yeah.
And in terms of white people singing, I just want to say we had a family meeting a while ago, and my children asked me to please stop singing. And especially not to burst into song unannounced. But sorry, John, ek wil in elk geval 'n vraag anyway, sorry.
So I also wanted to say that the idea of source text to target text, and then the relationship with that in relation to mother tongue. For me, because a lot of the people who are translated from the source text into the target text, that's not their mother tongue, but it's their poetry tongue. And so that was also an important thing that came through this, because one would assume that Koleka Putuma is, is it Xhosa, because, that thing also, as well as like someone is like, oh, what do you think about mother tongue and all of that. I think poetry is starting to also disrupt that idea of, and I always ask, who is the mother? Where does she live? What does she wear? And do we want to put that mother there? Because if you think about the mother, and then you think about the woman, and you think about what women are, and you think about the patriarchal society, and you go back and back and back, and you realize, just like the word vernacular as well that you touch on in your poem, all of these words are to say that it's less than. And so I think poets are also challenging the idea of what is mother tongue and what is poet tongue. And that's why people are constantly moving between languages and saying that I am not just a poet and my words are meaningful because I'm Xhosa, that I am equally proficient. I don't have to be born out of a mother and be taught by the mother for my words to be meaningful and well versed, that a mother tongue can develop, another mother tongue can develop from there. So I just wanted to make that observation as well. And then also like translating between, because what's happening right now is also people are now translating from standard Afrikaans to, because we have 87 varieties within the Afrikaans language, and probably in the English language as well, and we are now also translating within languages as well, and I think that is really also what came through with Adrian's poem, because I heard how Adrian was, his poem was in English, but it was a specific poet tongue that he had, and then you translated it into something that was not his poem, but was a variety of that poet's tongue, So it's also translating between poet tongues, not just the source text into the target text. And we really have to start thinking differently about translation. And I think this book really has really opened that for me as well.
I think that was a very interesting aspect to me, that a lot of the English poems were then translated into what readers might have assumed was the actual mother tongue. But what I would like to ask on that point is, at a PEN Congress 3 years ago, Jan Martel, who's actually a member of PEN Quebec, which is a French language organization, spoke up and spoke this really fluent French, and I was thrown. And then he said that he wrote Life of Pi in English because he wanted a certain distance, and that he believes that he wouldn't have been able to write Life of Pi in French, but at the same time he said he wouldn't have been able to write poetry in English. Now, so do you think that, in other words, what you're saying is that for some poets, they would actually also prefer that little bit of a distance when they're writing poetry, or isn't it a distance?
I don't think it's a distance. I disagree when people start doing and saying that, because I'm the whole time saying that language is also a character in a book. It is also something that needs to be developed. Just like you develop a voice for your character and you look at landscape and plot and what language in itself becomes a character in that book, and so you have to make the effort to craft that voice accordingly to what's happening to your and that's what I'm saying, and that's what poet voice does, that's what poet tongue does, because now it's no longer just about the language but treating it like a fictional or poetic device that I can manipulate, that it no longer just becomes source text into the target text, no longer just becomes and trance. What does trance mean? It doesn't mean from jumping from one, it's over, across, it grabs across. So the aspect of translation and the way that we view it, and going back to just the because in the dictionary, the dictionary says translation of the body, translation as a movement, translation as writing. That is the complete definition of what translation is, and it's always crossing boundaries, and it's always reaching across and taking like that all the time. So it tells us that it is not just this interconnected, but it's also trans-connected, and I think hybridity needs to be hybridity is also a really weird word. I think hybridization is like, I'm borrowing here from my own research. I'm looking at what does this hybridization mean, because some lady said to me, oh, I'm not going to buy your book, I'm going to wait for the Afrikaans to come out. And I was
that with Ching Chang Ching?
Yeah, and I was just like, you're going to wait for Godot? And she was like, oh, what is that? But in that moment I was just like, what is this thing that what is this anxiety happening for the book to be divided into two languages when it had arrived as its own language, and so I just realized in that instance, that I was trying to really, that's why I'm so interested in looking at the hybridization of language and what it does, to find out what the anxiety is happening there. And I came to the conclusion, it's actually, she answered it for me, we are still speaking apart. So as soon as you see something talking together, you are first going to react with anxiety. You are first going to act with fear before you really sit with it. And that was really the metaphor there for me, of like these two languages made her anxious because she doesn't know how to speak together like that. We don't know how to speak in symbiosis, and we don't read each other, and we don't talk to each other, and we can't understand each other. Like from one province to the next, like I was in Joburg 2 weeks ago and I was completely lost. And I'm living in a country, like I have a friend from in Nigeria, you can speak almost 40 varieties of a language, and I can't even speak 1.5 man of the 11. What is that about, and what does it say about our country that we are constantly saying we're a rainbow nation, da, da, da. But are we really speaking to each other, and are we making an effort to understand each other? And I think that is also the challenge that because we're like, oh, we don't want to have like translation, like language of the oppressor. Like we can't say that yet. As soon as like everyone can understand each other, we can start talking about that. But like sometimes I see people listening to Xhosa poets and they're clapping hands, and I feel like they're clapping hands because they find the sound more interesting than actually trying to understand the meaning of what that poet is saying. Because I know a poet who's really amazing, whose work, and people have just been clapping hands, and then I saw the translation and I thought, oh my word, this violence that's happening in this moment, people have been clapping hands at it. And so I think translation needs to still happen for us to be able to speak across and together as a... I think Gerda Odendaal said that the promotion of any language is the symbiosis of it, and I think translation is busy trying to do that. Yeah.
That was the perfect. That was the perfect closing note, and I think also once again underlined what I think is wonderful, what you managed to do with this anthology.